Everyone, welcome. The time is 6:30, and I will like to call this District 204 Committee of the Whole meeting to order. Marilyn, can you please call roll?
Member Alvarez.
Present.
Member Gina Daniels.
Present.
Member Delta Campbell.
Here.
Member Dillon.
Here.
Member Giannotti Fry.
Here.
Member Kennedy.
Present.
Member Lopez.
Here. I ask all to rise and participate in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Our next item is public participation. Marilyn, do we have anyone signed up for tonight's first public session?
We do.
As a reminder, there are two opportunities for public participation. The first opportunity is for individuals who are signing up prior to the meeting. For those of you who wish to speak during our second opportunity at the end of the meeting, please see Marilyn Muscolino just outside the room. The board appreciates hearing from our community, but does not engage in dialogue or discussion. If there is a comment that requires follow-up, the appropriate administrator will respond at a later time. In accordance with board policies 2:30, and 8:30, we appreciate you limiting your comments to 3 minutes and for keeping tonight's meeting respectful and civil. Marilyn, will you please call our first speaker?
Nancy Bramson.
Hi. I'm Nancy Bramson from Brookfield. I have held off speaking about the Willow Springs property sale since it did not seem like an actual possibility because there did not seem to be any potential buyers. The previous board discussions seemed to be more about considerations for the property. I am surprised to see it on the agenda and would like to make a comment about your decision to set the price in closed session today. In listening to the board discussions in open meetings and following the years-long process that has brought you all here, it can be assumed that the property price will not be set for industrial zoning because the village would not allow it and residents are against it. Therefore, it can also be assumed that the price definitely will not be set at the previous minimum industrial price of $55 million. For years, this board has also been talking about all the capital improvement projects that are needed to maintain and update the aging buildings and infrastructure on both campuses. Over $100 million was discussed as the cost to complete everything. With phase 1 wrapping up, it looks like there is not enough money to complete phase 2. Let's say the property minimum price would be half the industrial price, so $27 million at the current zoning. The sale of this property at that price would barely cover the cost of these improvements. Swapping and donating parcels with the local governing entities or to make it more attractive have also been mentioned. This, to me, makes no sense to consider for a district looking for funding. Talking about any of this without having any prospects or bids does not really seem like it should be the business of the district. Shouldn't it be the business of the developer interested in purchasing the land to work out the details with the governing entities? Frankly, even the governing entities' requests seem suspect. The previous District 204 board leaders met and discussed the property with the village, park district, and adjacent school district. If there is a chance of any of them end up being a potential buyer, this seems inappropriate. The connections of the previous two interested industrial prospects with the governing entities are too coincidental. It should really give you pause to consider those interested and how this potential sale will be carried out. I get the Willow Springs property has become an albatross for the district. Selling it might seem like a logical next step to remove the headache it has caused. My current concern is that in the very near future, with or without the property, you will no doubt need to go into taxpayer pockets for a referendum to cover the costs of completing these projects. With little revenue streams coming, you will have already sold this asset that down the road could be more valuable than it is currently. Setting price tonight seems hasty at this time with new board members that were recently sworn in. One would imagine they need more time to be caught up on the nuances of this topic, as well as adjusting to the job at hand.
Just finish up your thoughts. Thank
I
you.
have one more line, if you
Okay.
don't mind. Please consider holding on to the property and rethink the timing of setting the price and selling of this asset. Thank you.
That concludes our public participation for this section.
Very good. Then our first item this evening is related to the Willow Springs property discussion. As has occurred over the past several years, the district has explored the possibility of selling the Willow Springs property. In January of this year, the administrative committee was formed to explore options based on the listening tour that was completed with the Village of Willow Springs, Pleasantdale Park District, and Pleasantdale School District, as well as board chats that we have held and Willow Springs board meetings that we have attended. I'll turn it over to Brian to talk through where we are today. Brian Waterman.
Thank you. As President Alborz mentioned, at the December 3rd, 2024 Committee of the Whole meeting, the Board of Ed at the time provided direction to me to develop an administrative committee that would really accomplish three goals. Number one, digest the board's discussion on December 3rd. Number two, to discuss the variety of scenarios related to the district's property. And then three, bring that scenario information back to the entire D204 board with the ultimate goal being to formulate a path forward for the property and its status as a strategic asset for the district. The committee began their work in January, late January of 2025, really just working towards the board's goals as outlined in December. The committee consisted of myself, Tim Alborz, who was board vice president at the time, Joel Bita Daniels, who was board secretary at the time, James Levy as attorney for the board from Hodges Louisi, and Brian Stashak, director of business services. The first thing the committee did was brainstorm a variety of possibilities that could exist with the property. There were four scenarios that were briefly discussed but not recommended for further board discussion. Those were to simply hold on to the property for future use. The second one was to donate the property for public or private use. The third was to develop the property for District 204 use. And then fourth was exploring opportunities to lease the property in order to generate some revenue. So again, those were four scenarios that were briefly discussed by the committee but didn't really get much traction. The committee then kind of turned its attention to really looking at three primary scenarios and recommended that any further discussion occur with the whole board. Scenario number one was to simply set terms and conditions and conduct a sealed bid process, just like the attempt 2 years ago, per the requirements outlined in Illinois School Code. Scenario two was to engage in land swap discussions and/or land sale discussions with both the Pleasantdale Park District and the Pleasantdale School District, and then set terms and conditions and conduct a sealed bid process. And then scenario three was to set terms and conditions and conduct a sealed bid process with a buyer contingent on the buyer actually engaging in land swap discussions and land sale discussions with both the Park District and the School District. So as the spring went on, the committee discussed a timeline for some future board discussions. Really believed like it was highly unlikely that any of those scenarios could have played out before April 25th when the new board would be seated. And so the goal was, from the committee's perspective, was to share all this information and the timeline with our new board members, which was done a few weeks ago. And then based upon that was happened at the time as well, but based upon the direction that the committee received from the board's whole discussion on February 18th, we then continued to meet on February 27th to continue to flesh out those three scenarios, and specifically to zero in on scenario two, which ultimately is what the committee's recommendation was and still remains to today. So in this scenario number two, the recommendation is that the board explore potential land swap discussions with the Pleasantdale Park District. Simultaneously to that, the recommendation is that the board explore offering a sale of a 7-acre parcel of the district's land to the Pleasantdale School District. And that is a direct result of the conversations that Tim as board vice president and Joe Gretsch as former board president had with all three entities, specifically the Park District and the School District last fall. And so that's kind of where we are today. I just wanted to kind of provide the overview of the committee's work. That's what's happened from really December when the board first talked about this up until now. And I would certainly invite either Tim or Jill or James to add any additional thoughts or fill in any blanks that I missed. It's also important to note that all the information that I just shared, including a complete recap of the committee's work, is included in the public board packet for this evening as well.
Yeah, I think I'll start off by just saying, I think in my mind, it makes sense for us to just start with the first one, which is the potential land swap with the Park District. Again, going back to the community discussions, the tours that we did and the conversations that we've had, everybody that we met with said, we understand and respect that you have this valuable piece of property. We understand that you have things that need to be completed in your building. We respect that. We want it within zoning, which in our discussions we were in agreement with. And the only thing that they had asked of us is, could we swap some of that property so it makes it more feasible and usable for them, and also potentially could help us in our sale as well. I think, again, and I'm one of 7, but my personal opinion on this is, if it gets us revenue and we can be a good steward to the community as well, to me that's a win-win, right? We get money for the infrastructure work that we need to do. We're listening and hearing to the local community while also supporting the entire district and getting revenue for our building. So,
Can I just add?
yeah,
something?
please.
So like, I think in that discussions that we had with this recommendation is, the committee felt that this wasn't going to harm us also if we do choose to move forward with the sale. So I think
Yeah.
it was being a good neighbor, facilitating and hearing the community and, you know, our partners in Willow Springs, and that this would not have a negative impact, we believed as a committee, to move forward with the sale. If we choose to do that and vote on that as a board. But really just to, you know, be, like I said, a good neighbor, trying to listen and do that.
Can I ask a real quick question,
Yeah.
just for clarification? So the Pleasantdale Park District seemingly is okay with this, that's what you're talking about.
Mhm.
But the residents and the village itself and the school district are all also on board with scenario number 2, as far as we know?
So the village, yes. We've met with them, and again, our discussions has been primarily about selling within zoning, right? And there's variances within that, but that was something that they felt very comfortable with. We've had open board meeting chats that we've hosted here. We've, as I mentioned, Jill Gretsch attended a village here. So I can't say with certainty that the entire village is good with this, but I think the people that I've spoken with and I've heard speak understand that this is our property and that we have a right to sell it within zoning. And I haven't heard a lot of arguments, me personally, about selling it within zoning. And this, I'm sorry, specific to your question about the swap as well.
And like, I think like a little background information that might be helpful for you and for the new members here, and for those listening, is like, that Jill Gretsch and Tim and Brian, I don't know who else was in those meetings. James had met with, sorry, I forgot about you. Sorry, but they had met with, individually, with like Willow Springs.
The village.
The village, the Park District, the school. You had offered to meet with the emergency facility.
department.
The emergency
Yeah.
fire department.
Yeah.
And they declined, they didn't need a meeting. So you had put that out to meet with the community directly, and they had not,
Yeah.
you know, 3 out of 4 sat down and met. And then that was the summaries that I know were brought back to us.
And they were good, again, good conversations. Again, my perspective, and I don't know if anyone else wants to speak to that, but they were not contentious. They were collaborative. They were, you know, we weren't coming in there saying that we had any authority to do or say anything. We just wanted to hear what their interests were, what their value, what they needed. And then we decided, prior to the new board being sat, we discussed those, right? Like, we wanted to talk about what those were, and then at a certain point it became, in our mind, not the right path to go because new people were coming on and we wanted to put a pause on things. So,
I think too, just to recap, the recommendation to potentially swap land with the Park District is born out of the fact that the Park District approached District 204 going on 3 years ago now with an offer to swap land. So on that entire parcel, the Park District owns about 7 acres within the middle of that. And so the committee, and at the time, the District 204 board declined to engage in those land swap conversations. So the committee's recommendation is, let's go back to that and ask them to consider that. So that's the Park District piece of it. The Pleasantdale School District piece of that is, as Tim said, based upon the conversations last fall with their board, their administration. They have some early childhood center needs and had requested if we ever get to the point of selling, they would be interested, potentially, of course, a lot of factors at play, but potentially interested in purchasing 7 acres of the parcel. So that's, I think, just keeping this very simple to that recommendation from the committee are those two things. And so that's the background of why the committee felt like that's the first step that the board could take if the board's interested in it. That's the next step that should be taken. Is to just simply consider the Park District and the Pleasantdale School District.
And so that would mean, even if down the line we did not vote for a sale, this was something that we would do that would benefit the community and our constituents.
Wait, say that again, if we didn't vote?
Even if, let's say, we decide we don't want to sell the property, because that discussion's not being had here
Right.
tonight, that this is still being a good neighbor
Right.
to the community.
To offer that
Right.
to the Park District and to Pleasantdale. And again, you said that, and I guess James would have weighed in on if there's any detriment to the district to do it this way.
Yeah, so,
Right, so I think, this would be a good time, I think, James, if you can tee it up for us to say, what are some of the general legal and board governance processes that would occur with a land swap? Kind of just explain it to us, what's involved.
The land swap, so tonight is just whether or not you want to proceed down these roads. Nothing's final tonight. So if we wanted to discuss with the Park District and the school district these options, and the parties were able to reach agreement, those all come back to you for vote. So nothing tonight is final. I just want to make that first. A land swap with the Park District is similar to a sale that goes under a different statute that doesn't require you going out to bid to the public. It allows you to negotiate directly with other governmental bodies. You still need that the 5 affirmative votes of your board to accomplish that. But again, assuming that this is something that both parties were interested in, we would meet with them. We'd come to terms, I would assume, similar to the terms that were out 3 years ago, but not necessarily the same. Talk about that, and then we'd bring back, if the parties were able to negotiate an agreement for action before the board at that time. A sale, again, to the school district, if that is something that ultimately arises, it's the same process again, whether it's a donation, a swap, if you will, or a sale. We're able to negotiate directly with other public bodies under a separate statute, and that's why we're able to do those two types of arrangements. With respect to selling the property at large, let's just switch gears for a second. That process is different. Real brief, that process requires you to go out to bid, to put terms and conditions on the street. You do not, like your own home, negotiate one-on-one or have folks come to you. We have to go out, we put terms and conditions on the street with the bid, and then bids come in. The board would open those bids and determine at that juncture if they like the bids, if they want to sell it, things of that nature. So it's a slightly different process, but you're able to, again, in this scenario with the 2 items that are before you, work directly with those parties, and then again, bring back agreements for y'all to discuss and determine ultimately if that's what you want to do.
Does anybody have any other questions or anything about the proposed land swap? Any concerns?
Well, I have a question. When you guys say land swap, what are we swapping? Are we swapping like swampland with good land, or swapping equal to of greater value? How did you guys figure that swap?
Well, I think those two questions you're asking, but I think, James, because you do know how this survey,
Yes,
it looks,
yes.
how there's that, and I think it's all good land. I don't think there's any swamp
Yeah, well,
land.
as far as the land, I would go back to the administration. I'm not certain what the original proffered sale, swap, between
And I don't think we have
but the
anything
land, as far as I'm aware, and I have not read every report on the land, that it's not a swap of unusable land for usable land. It's the land that the Park District has is in a location in yours that doesn't benefit them very well. It also
it's
may
actually
act
all
as a hindrance
yeah.
to you in the sale, so it would be
Okay.
making a more complete square or rectangle and moving things around, if that makes sense. So that would be the intent with respect to the land swap.
In terms of the topography though, Elias, so that the 7 acres the Park District has is mostly flat and just grassy area. The rest of the parcel is a wooded lot.
But, I mean, you're not aware, James, like any part being like a preserve or something like that that would be unusable?
No,
think that's
I'm
probably what you were
unaware that
thinking,
there's
Elias.
any, right.
Okay.
That
Is
anyone
that-
would
was
be
it you?
getting
Okay.
a significantly restricted parcel as a result of the land swap.
And I don't think, as a committee, said this would be the exact acreage.
I was just gonna ask that. We don't know what we're swapping. It's just 7 acres-ish for 7
And
acres.
I don't know, like,
It would require a lot more conversations, right? Like, I feel like our discussion tonight is, are we open to that idea, right? And then we walk down that path and start having some conversations
Again, they originally brought
Right.
a couple years ago,
to
so
us. Yeah.
we assume that they're still okay with
At
this.
the time, they had a
Yeah.
desire to move their parcel further west, which would then be adjacent to to a park they already own there, as well as the Pleasant
Yeah.
Elementary School. So in theory, it would be the exact same size lot that you would move west.
but I mean, it theoretically could go from like a rectangle to, like a
Right.
square to a
Right.
rectangle.
Yeah.
So I don't know that we even know where it would be. It was just, the question tonight is, would we as a board entertain that?
Right.
So that we could be in a position that, to go back to the Park District to see if there would still be interest.
And as of the conversations when you did the tour of talking to all of the affected parties in that area, as you and Jill did, they were still interested even at that time?
They were.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to commend you, Jill, Tim, Jill Gretsch, where you are, and Brian and James, for following a process and engaging all these various different entities and reinvigorating those conversations, and just enabling us to go through the 3 different scenarios and providing us even more kind of digestive content, the speed, community engagement, and I forget the third component that you also looked at. Yes, proceeds, thank you. I found it to help with digesting so much content, and just very appreciative of this. And continuing to engage the community in these conversations is, I think, I'm all for that, so
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
Agreed.
I have a different question that's not pertaining to the swap. So if the board sets terms and conditions and adopts a resolution for the sale of the property, and you go through the bid process, you're not under any obligation to accept a bid.
Correct.
So you can go through that process, and at the end of the day, you open all the bids, and you're like, yeah, we don't want to do it.
That's correct.
Okay.
And I mean, like maybe back that up to bring it back to what we're talking about here, the land swap. If we get to it and they say they want some weird, like triangular thing, and we don't agree to it, that we think that would be detrimental, we have to vote on that as a board.
Correct.
It's not, we're not committing ourselves
this,
to
and we
it.
bring something back, and you guys are like, I don't like that. I don't like
Yeah.
that.
Right, again, this would be the process where you start talking with them, and
Yep.
the entire board's gonna see, I think it was Mr. Kennedy who raised this, what are you gonna swap? That, if the parties are able to get down that road, then we're gonna have to identify exactly, right? You're getting this 6.99, we're getting 7.01, or whatever it is. Yeah, so that's all gonna come back to you. Right now, it's just, this path, is this the path that the board wants us to go down and explore? And if so, we will, and if there are things to be determined by the board, those will come back to the board. This is not final resolution by any means.
And James, is it fair to say that the timeline for this process, it could be a very long time? In that the idea, I think, bringing it to the new board right away is, let's get some discussions moving. If we gave, let's say, an August 30th timeline for them to come back and tell us whether or not they wanted to swap or not, again, that process, even just that one step, could take a considerably long time. So, but is it fair to say like an August 30th date would be a good benchmark for us to request or get a commitment from them?
Yeah, I think that's fine. Again, obviously, I'm not familiar with their board meetings, but let's assume they only have one board meeting a month, right? That's 2 board meetings.
Yeah.
So that's fair. And again, obviously, if they're faster or slower, we can accommodate them, but I think that's an appropriate, and that's 2 board meetings. I think that's a fair amount of time.
Okay.
So unless there's any reservations, I think we're, from the nonverbals I'm reading, I'm sensing that we want to continue moving forward with that process. And then as far as the school district wanting property, again, that came out of our listening tour. The initial request was donation, but they also understood that we have a fiduciary responsibility to our district and everybody around us. And they said at a minimum, we would request the opportunity to purchase 7 acres. They are looking to expand their facilities and create a new school. And so, again, that was part of our administrative committee to talk about what those options could be. The recommendation at this point from the administrative committee is to give them the opportunity to purchase that property. And I think what we're just looking for today is, if that is the direction that we wanted to go, that we would go into closed session to come up with a purchase price.
And James, maybe you can then respond to, what does that look like for us? If we're going into closed session, the only thing we're going to talk about, would be setting of the purchase price, and how would we present that? But also, we'd have to come back and vote on it and do those kind of things. Right?
Well,
If
you
you could
would-
go through that process again with us about,
so-
because this is a different topic than the land swap.
Right, but as far as setting the price, you would go into closed session, presumably you'd come up with some maximum price that you're willing to sell the property to them. How you determine, how much float there is in that would all be discussed internally. There would be no vote tonight with respect to this, because again, there's not an action item. We don't have a finalized agreement. It would just be allowing your committee to engage in those discussions and going forward.
And just to be clear, we're just talking about the 7 acres. We're not talking about the entire parcel.
Right.
That was requested
To Pleasantdale School District.
Right.
to the school district.
And really, in that request, maybe Pleasantdale comes back and says, we only want 3 acres. That would be, this is just opening that door
Okay.
to have that.
And again, I think to reiterate what we've already said about the entire process, this is what was requested. Us, the administrative committee, feeling like to be good neighbors to the Willow Springs community, giving them the first right of refusal for that property, while still being fiduciarily responsible and getting funds for that property, would make sense, at least to us. So that was our recommendation.
And what kind of timeline would they be expected to adhere to as well for something like that?
I would say the same timeline,
August
right?
30th?
Yeah, I think, again,
Okay.
the same, it's, assuming they have 1 board meeting, 2 board meetings should be enough. If it's not, without, they can reach out and let us know, and then you can all decide if you want to keep engaging. But 2 board meetings is usually sufficient time.
And because, James, these 2 separate items actions, or whatever you want to call them, can be done concurrently. So the process could move forward.
Yeah, tonight is just direction. Is this the direction you want the committee to keep pursuing? And let's say it is. When let's say they go swimmingly, everyone agrees, then on a future board meeting, we would have 2 separate action items to approve 2 separate agreements. One, if it's a swap agreement, detailing exactly the nature of that swap with the Park District, and then the other would be a sale agreement with the school district,
Okay.
detailing obviously price and what exactly is being sold. So that would be a future.
I think your question is, they're 2 separate agreements, so
Right.
they could move along at
Right.
the same
That's
pace,
what I
or
think
one may go a little faster. and-
Right, that's.
Oh, I'm sorry, yes.
Is that what you?
Or one might not happen and one
Right.
Yeah,
could.
yep.
Right.
Okay, so I
Yes.
just wanted to, fully
I'm sorry,
flesh
yes.
out.
Yeah.
There-
those
So they
different
could happen
scenarios.
concurrently,
Thank
but
you.
they're 2
Yeah.
separate
And
transactions.
then action items,
Yeah,
right.
thanks for the clarity. Yep. Okay.
So, does anybody else have any more clarity they need on this, or, it looks like when I'm looking around, you're
Yeah, I
willing to
think-
entertain
Yeah, I think we can.
having this discussion, and then our closed
See where
session
it
would be
goes.
the discussion about setting the price for the school district.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Well, in that case, again, I just want to thank everybody for their discussion and thoughtful questions. I think that it's our discussions and our advice, our legal advice, and the voice that we've heard from the community always makes these decisions better. So I appreciate the conversation. So in order to begin exploring the idea of selling this property and land swap, we will need to agree in closed session to come up with that price. So tonight's agenda will follow that opportunity. Our goal is to discuss this later tonight during closed session. And important to note that the board will not take any action following this closed session later this evening. All right.
Just in case you don't have it, that would be a 2C6 exemption.
Thank you.
Setting the price.
I would read that at the end, I
Yeah,
promise.
yeah.
But thank you.
That's part of, before we go
I
in,
appreciate that.
Perfect.
Okay. Thank you, James.
Thank you.
Okay, so next on our agenda, we'll be doing our first reading of Press 118. I will turn that over to Brian Waterman.
Thank you, President Alvarez. So this is this collective board's first experience with policy review and our subscription with Press Plus. So I want to first give a little bit of background. LT, like almost every other district in the state, maintains its policies through the press service, which is provided by the Illinois Association of School Boards. You can look on the website, but as they describe on the website, Press Plus is an online resource for school boards looking for well-reasoned sample policies, exhibits, and procedures, plus all the legal rationale and the legal references that support them. This helps the board really to ensure that all of our policies are supported by school code, by state legislation, by sound legal compliance, and through best practice in school district governance as well. So typically, Press Plus issues a new batch of policy updates about 3 to 4 times a year. On April 24th, we received the latest issue, which was Press 118. And again, that's the latest policy recommendations that we recommend that the board review and update. Here at LT, we also add an additional step, which is with each press update, we request that the board's legal counsel, Jennifer Rosenberg, who is here with us tonight from Hodges and Louisi, she puts her eyes on all these policy updates and reviews and offers any additional necessary legal guidance related to the recommendations. The way we typically review them is really we provide the information to you. We always hope to get this. I mean, typically we send board packets out the Wednesday before the meeting, but in this case, we always try to get press updates out at least 3 weeks, a month ahead of time, so you have time to read through all of them. And then, of course, we conduct a first reading, which is what you're doing tonight. So again, no votes tonight. Nothing is happening in action tonight. This is just a first reading. Ed is going to provide a brief overview of like the different categories which the policy updates fall within. And then between our team and Jennifer Rosenberg, who's here also, we should be able to answer your questions. And certainly if we can't answer your question tonight, we will follow up either later in the week or certainly by the next board meeting. But the ultimate goal is on June 16th, the board would conduct a second reading and consider final approval of all the policies included. So with that as a background, I'll turn it over to Ed to get started.
Thank you, Dr. Waterman. The policies in Section 1 for Press 118 are existing board policies that have drafted revisions that may include updates of an administrative nature, new legal references or footnotes, as well as policies that have other language suggestions. This is our largest section of policies for consideration tonight. There are 22 policies for review in this section. It should be noted, however, that not all of these policies have significant changes that affect the way the policy is currently being interpreted. Within Section 2, we do have one policy. This is a policy that has been reviewed by legal counsel and is being recommended to be rewritten from the current policy language. The reason for the updates for this policy stem from changes to Title IX regulations and a return to the 2020 guidelines. And finally, there is one policy in Section 3. This is a new draft policy related to a new provision in school code related to the Ensuring Success in Schools law. We also have some additional information about this law that just came in this afternoon. There's pending legislation that may modify some of the training requirements or postpone some of the dates. We'll continue to work with legal counsel to plan for that implementation as we move forward. As Dr. Waterman previously mentioned, we are fortunate to have Jennifer Rosenberg from Hodges Louisi with us tonight. She's able to answer any questions that you might have, as are members of our administrative team.
Okay. I don't know if it would, first of all, Jennifer, thank you for the work that you've done on this. I think there's a lot to digest in here, and I think the work that you did on the front end helped guide at least some of the questions that I had. So I don't know if it would make most sense if we go based on Jennifer's draft, policy by policy, and see if there are additional questions, or if we're good to move on. Would that make the most sense for people?
Yeah, whatever you guys are comfortable with.
So do we want to start with the uniform grievance procedure? Does anybody have any thoughts or questions on that one?
That's 2260 is the number.
The only question I had on that one is the policy itself identifies the person, and I'm assuming that's legally required to identify the person instead of just the position. In case the person left, we would then have to go back into policy and change those names. Is that?
Yes, that is correct. So the reason why both the person and their direct contact information are listed for your non-discrimination coordinator, your Title IX coordinator, as well as your complaint managers is because a variety of the non-discrimination and other laws that apply to that policy require that specific contact information, right? That it's not just a generic listing by title or generic email. The policy as written and kind of structured by press actually is kind of technically set up to be adopted with those blank, meaning that the board is not adopting it with a specific name and contact information in there, and then it directs the superintendent and the administration to then insert those names and that information afterwards, so that for exactly that purpose, right? If you had a new administrator or you were putting someone new in one of those roles with the start of a school year or mid-year, the administration can change that because it doesn't end up being a substantive change to the policy itself.
So along those same lines, our revised one and our new one don't have names in there, right? So that's the intention of press, is putting that in there. So it wouldn't require us as a board to come back then and say, this person's gone, we now have to change the policy to include
Correct.
those
You don't
people.
have, if there is a need to change the person or update the contact information, the board does not need to take action again.
Thank you.
And I'm sorry, I'm coming up slow on this, and I'm frustrated too because I had my packet with all my notes and I left it at the office. So now I'm trying to scramble and remember because I did have a ton of notes. But so when you said, so I know we mentioned who our complainant managers are in the other policies. You're saying we don't have to do that anymore at all, or specifically to 2260?
Oh, no, that's a good clarification question.
Okay.
What I think Tim's question was too, and what I was just answering is specifically just from an adoption standpoint.
Okay.
Is that when you receive the policy, you're adopting essentially the substance of the policy.
Okay.
And then the policy is directing the administration, the superintendent, to insert the designated names. Now, obviously, Dr. Waterman, Ed, others can inform the board, right, and reasonably so, of who the individuals are that you are designating as your non-discrimination coordinator, your Title IX coordinator, and the complaint managers. But that is the purpose of it, that it's not that they don't need to be named or otherwise, it's just
Okay.
simply that they're
The
blank.
board won't have to, okay.
And oftentimes what I think press does when they are just doing an update to an existing policy, they're going to carry over the names they've been provided to slot in there, whereas some of your new, like the new policy 7255 that's included, doesn't yet have anything inserted. So that's just the difference between there. It's, but like I said, more when you're adopting, it's truly actually technically blank, and then it's inserted later just from an administrative standpoint.
And I know we were really careful about giving, like, in certain instances, our students access to someone they felt comfortable having that conversation with. And I know we have to assign somebody with it, but how do we address, or do we address that?
So we will have multiple complaint managers.
Okay.
I serve as the non-discrimination manager. Dr. Owens and I will serve as Title IX coordinators. But then as far as complaint managers, we'll have one at each campus. But we also have other people that we can serve as designees in
Serve
different
that
situations.
role.
So we can
Okay.
certainly work throughout the individual circumstances for that.
Okay, yeah, I was just trying to make sure that any person that has to have access to that feels comfortable in that
absolutely.
role to be able to speak.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So, but I have a question for when you said that Dr. Rowe would be in here, but I only see your name as a non-discrimination.
Dr. Owens, for that yeah, for Title IX.
For- all right,
Different
looking at the wrong-
positions will have different non-discrimination managers or complaint managers, just depending on what the
Got it,
law
okay.
says, right?
Okay. Okay.
And I think to your question is gonna come up with a policy later
Yeah.
that I also have a similar question
Okay.
to, but
Yeah.
maybe we'll hold off
Get-
on that.
I
until we
know,
get-
I know. They
'cause
get very meaty. These
They
were
they
meaty
do,
ones.
and I was
yeah.
trying to knock out 2 questions with one, because I started with that one, and then we went down to the new ones.
There's a
the
lot
revised
of
ones.
legs to these. They're connected in a lot of ways, yeah.
Anything else for policy 2260? Okay. And then 2265 is Title IX grievance procedure rewritten. My question was similar to what we just discussed, but does anybody else have any other questions on that?
What page is it? Can you guys give me the page again?
I can't get my,
It's on page 2 of the Hedges Louisiana.
Yeah, I was just thinking about the policy itself in the packet, if you guys knew which page we were talking
can't get
about.
anything.
2265, I think, is actually in the PDF that came from press, is actually the last policy. So it's the second one in my memo.
Okay.
Only because I went numerically.
Mine
But
are
from an
looking for it.
order
Hold
from
on.
press, I think because they view it as a rewritten policy, it's the last one in there.
Oh, with the draft up. it
Yes.
says.
Okay. So it's towards the back, the new draft update, the 725.
Got it. It's the second session. It's under.
This one here.
I got it on page 104 of the packet.
I'm seeing it on page 89 of
I was gonna say,
95.
all of our
Is that right,
numbers,
Marilyn?
nothing
104.
different.
Yeah, yeah, that's fine. Yeah,
Lot going on.
we got it.
Press plus numbers, and the numbers that Brian's at is our packet number.
Yep.
So it's two
Yep.
different page
Yeah.
numbers.
Uh-huh.
Which one are you looking at?
Title, it's the
Yep.
rewritten.
Okay.
Good on that one? And then policy 415, identity protection. I did have a question on that, unless anybody else did first. I guess my only question on that one is, how do we do this now? Or in the past, how do we protect from cybersecurity? I assume,
Ed, can you speak briefly about our cybersecurity, briefly?
We're implementing additional protective measures all the time as they come available to us. For example, things like increasing or upgrading firewalls with many tools like CrowdStrike that look for malware, ransomware, things that come in. And also then things like making sure high-risk accounts are protected with MFA. And actually spreading thing that'll go to all accounts eventually.
But to your point, that's a real issue for schools.
Yeah.
I mean, it is. We talk about this all the time, but
Yeah.
there have been some serious issues
Yep.
at schools.
yeah, there have been. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ed.
Appreciate that.
That's great. Any other questions on cybersecurity? Identity protection? Next is policy 480, auditing and audits, or I'm sorry, accounting and audits. Questions on that one?
Makes sense.
I just had one minor, the capitalization threshold going from 5,000 to 10,000, is that what the change is?
Yes.
Do we know the rationale behind it, like why?
A change in the regulations. That is, so
Driven.
now your policy is going to reflect what current law is.
I would say like a lot of that happens, right? State legislation changes, and as a board, the recommendation is to always to follow that.
Stay in line with
Stay in
that.
line
We
with that.
don't,
right?
yeah. We try not to, yeah.
Certainly, you don't have
You're
to,
right.
but really, that's
Best
why
practice.
that's why you pay a service
Right.
to constantly monitor state legislation and
Yeah.
make sure that we're within school code, within the law, all that.
What ends up happening also is, for example, the bidding threshold, the capitalization threshold, as we see pricing increasing with inflation, those types of things, that's why they're bumping some of these things up because of some of those increases in cost as
Rises,
well.
yeah.
We just did the bidding threshold a couple of years ago from 25 to 35 for that reason.
Anything else on that one? And then we are up to policy 510, equal employment opportunity and minority recruitment. Any questions on that one?
Yeah, that was pretty minor.
Yeah.
Update to some
Okay.
language.
And then workplace harassment prohibited, policy 520. I guess my only question on this one is, do the changes reflect any changes to our practice?
No, I would say that there haven't been any changes to the practice. The only change for this one is going back to that Title IX
Right.
discussion that I was talking. We were operating under the 2020 guidelines.
Okay.
Press 115 implemented the 2024 guidelines, which
Yeah.
we did not
We did
adopt.
not, right.
This is just officially taking everybody back to the 2020 guidelines with us.
Okay.
Thanks for that explanation, Ryan, too.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that
Yeah, that
helps.
does help.
You'll see there are a lot of policies where it references state of Tennessee versus Cardona. It's that Title IX regulation.
And then, making sure nobody else has questions. Policy 560 expenses. Questions, concerns?
No.
Policy 5100 staff development program.
One of the biggest changes with this one, just in case the
Yeah.
board is looking, it was the implementation of this Ensuring Success in Schools program, and that is another thing that I referenced, that there are training requirements in there. We'll continue to work with Hodges to make sure that we are on top of those training regulations, and if there are any changes to what those are, before the implementation date of July 1st, or if there's any postponement of that, we'll certainly make those changes internally.
That was definitely one of my questions.
I know.
Right,
Are
the
we going to
training.
spend time on that 26A, the ESS? Is that?
Well, there is a separate policy for that, 755, it's 7255 is a
Right, because
separate
then
policy.
won't that affect what's written here?
Certainly can, right, depending on
Okay.
how that law
Because I feel like there's
ultimately
quite a few that kind of feed off of that. So I was hoping we could have a little bit more discussion around.
Sure, we can answer any questions that the board might have, absolutely.
I do have one actually connected to what's written on this one, because it does talk about a resource person, and I think this is where, Carrie, maybe you were leaning towards before also. So we designate, the policy requires a designated resource person at each campus, correct?
That's correct.
Are we, I think to Carrie's point earlier, some students may feel comfortable talking to some people and not others. Will those resource people or person, can they be identified as alpha social worker, one person? Will it be all, like, how will that work in practice, I guess?
We would work with legal counsel because we occupy a unique places that we're one district with multiple buildings, but in very close proximity. So how does that look like in implementation?
Yeah.
At the very least, we could certainly just have one person at each campus, try to have, one where if a student feels more comfortable with the other, it's a quick bringing the other person over from the other campus. I would certainly work with Dr. Owens and in her role as Director of Student Services and Hodges as well, to make sure that we are meeting those requirements of the law, but then also providing students with opportunities to feel comfortable in those conversations as well.
I think that second part is key, right? Like,
Yep.
we obviously have to make sure we're following the law, but we also want students to feel comfortable in who they're talking to.
Absolutely.
I mean, and it does say it here, at least one.
Yeah.
So I suppose depending on what our bandwidth could allow but I mean, those people all would have to be trained and will be trained.
Correct.
So,
Assuming that's going to be current staff already, there's no outside hiring?
No, they would be people on staff that we have designated that occupy those roles of counselor, social worker within student services. We'll continue to follow what's happening with that law as it relates to training, because that could, if that's something that's pushed back later or there's changes to what that training looks like, we would obviously just want to make sure we are on top of that. But it's not uncommon when there are changes in laws like this to have additional training, and so we're prepared for that once all of that becomes finalized.
And the only thing that I would add from the legal perspective piece of it is ensuring that we have like a specific person or persons, right, if it's more than one person or designated at the different buildings, designated because one of the legal requirement to do so, but also because they also then have responsibilities under the statute. But that does not obviously limit then if you have a student or others that want to access resources or report something to someone else. I mean, that's part of that broader training that you also give your staff, similar to other laws that we've talked about, whether it's Title IX or other issues. We make sure that staff are going to be trained to know that if someone is coming and reporting X, Y, or Z concern, even if they're not necessarily the designated person, they know who that designated person is. But we want to make sure that you're also kind of not overly broad, like in a more broad sense, designating a whole lot of people, because there are certain responsibilities they have under the law, and we don't want to also be spreading that too thin or requiring that of too many people. So you're usually going to have one or two specific people designated, but obviously reports can go to other individuals, and then they know to bring it back to those designated other people.
Thank you. Okay.
Any other questions on that one? Next, we have policy 6235, access to electronic, just lost my screen. Did I miss one?
Yeah.
6150.
Kind of a big one.
Oh,
Electronic
6150.
networks. I missed one, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
6150, home and hospital instruction. Thank you. Any questions on that one?
Again, this one references that same insurance success in student
Yeah.
in schools law as
I
well.
just need a little more time on
Okay.
the ESS, so when we get to that.
Okay. And then 6235, access to electronic networks.
This is, I mean, I'll just
Yeah.
jump here. This is one that we really have a decision to make on whether to adopt the recommended policy. We've talked about this as a team. Over the last 18 months, our team has done some work with AI. We have some guidelines in place for staff. We have a resourcing in each classroom. We've had a task force that's been kind of working on that. So in terms of adhering to the spirit of the recommended policy, we're there. But our recommendation would be for you guys to adopt this policy so that it is policy, and that will allow us to expand on what we're already doing with
Okay.
AI.
And create a
Otherwise, we
plan.
have no policy. Yeah.
I think that, that would have been my question. Like,
Yep.
is there a
Yeah.
downside to
I don't
listing
see
it?
a downside
Okay.
to adopting the policy.
Mhm.
The downside would be we'd have board policy with no reference to
Right.
AI
Right,
in this policy, which just doesn't feel right in 2025.
Okay.
The only piece that I had a question about was the frequency of the training, in terms of the new copy. Item 4 just says ensure that everyone is trained. Because this is moving so quickly, is there a way that we just continuously, I don't know how we address the whole frequency aspect of training, but just wanted to pose that as a question.
Well, and I think in some ways I'm going to defer to kind of your administrative staff as it relates to the program that you will ultimately develop, right, as that relates to it. And I guess the up and the downside of AI is that it is moving at such a fast pace that we probably always will feel like we're trying to play catch up on that. And like I said, I think it really just is going to defer to what is the program or the procedure that you're going to determine internally about, how are we managing AI, who needs to be trained, right? That may differ depending on certain positions in the school. How are we then managing and also and providing this information to students and all of that type of stuff. But it's certainly, I think, going to be one of the important components, I think, is exactly to Dr. Waterman's point about this really just kind of moralizes in board policy to allow the administrative team and others that are working on this to move forward. And that's exactly, I think, a component that, we certainly would encourage, right, including. And that's the purpose of number 4 there, is really the directive from the board to say, one, training is clearly important, and then what is that going to look like and how often is that going to be for then your, committees to develop as it relates to that.
I think the other thing too, and Scott can speak to this, but the work that the task force did pretty much highlighted the fact that this is very content specific, right? The use of AI in a classroom is going to depend upon the department, the classroom that it is. And so that kind of led into the resource that we're provided for our teachers.
So essentially, we developed a stoplight approach, and there's a poster in every classroom about AI. There's when a teacher makes an assignment, they need to explicitly state whether they can or cannot use AI on that assignment and the degree to which they can use AI. So there's a red light, which is this is not allowed, and so you need to make sure that you don't. And if we discover that you are, then we're looking at our cheating and plagiarism policy. We have a yellow, which is basically you can use it. You just need to make sure that you cite it. but we want to make sure that you're using your own work, but you can enhance it. I think how most people are using AI in a professional sense, that's that area. And then the green light is we want you to use AI, we're going to teach you how to use AI, and we're going to ensure that the product is AI-based. That being said, we also understand that ChatGPT, for example, is not designed for students under 18. So we're using tools that are designed for students. We have a number of software tools for that. The professional development we have done training for all of our teachers at an institute day actually a year and a half ago, and started with a basic what is it, what isn't it, and helping people sort of understand the basics. Our tech coaches, we have 4 of them. They also do regular, it's like lunch and learns for people to learn more about things. They'll work with individual teams, which they've done on late starts. They also send out a newsletter with lots of tips and tricks and things that you can try. So we are also, if you look on our syllabi that are posted on the website, there is a reference to the use of AI for each course. So we've been pretty comprehensive at the start, partly because we're hearing a lot of things. A, it's being used, and B, our faculty themselves weren't necessarily aware of what it was or how it works. So we're still trying to demystify things. We absolutely want people to understand there's hallucinations and that kids need to realize that AI is not always right. And then we also want our teachers to understand that AI detectors don't work, and that catching someone using AI is not the same as other plagiarism tools. So there's a lot of information needs to happen. The task force will continue, and that's what's nice about this policy. It requires there to be regular training, it requires there to be regular meetings, and to sort of keep up to date on what's going on.
Thank you, that's great
Is
to
that ever
hear.
a summer workshop topic? I don't remember ever seeing it. Like, there's no, they don't do like.
No, we haven't
AI.
done anything with summer work because we really want it to be course-based. And so some teams are doing some really neat stuff with it, and other teams are still red light. They're like, we're red light all the time,
Okay.
red light in this bunch.
Okay. Okay.
That's fine.
I can appreciate that. I understand. Yeah. Okay, good.
I do like your holistic approach to it, though, because it is a tool that I have
Yeah.
used as an adult, right? So we're not only using it as a resource, a supplementary resource, but also as a primary resource in some situations, and there can be value to that. So I appreciate that we're teaching to that as well.
The tool we're really intrigued by are closed AI systems, because we don't want our kids putting information about themselves into an AI generator
Right.
and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But closed AI systems are not commercial. They are designed to take what you give it and keep it there. They don't take your information and sell it or move it around other places. So we've actually been looking at Panorama, which does our surveying,
Yep.
and they do some really cool stuff with closed AI systems to help create work plans and support plans for kids and that kind of thing, but that stays all on the inside. So those are things, like, as you said, it changes all the time. I heard about this a month ago. I've had 3 salespeople try to sell it to me in the last week, and we've had 2 people do trainings in the last 4 days. So
Oh, wow.
that's new, right? So who knows what it'll be by the time this gets approved.
And they're also, isn't SOPA the regular, the rules that we have in place to prevent student information from getting out? And these
Correct.
are all SOPA approved
Correct.
sites that we're using.
Yeah, but SOPA, some of those commercial tools don't necessarily apply, or, don't follow that. And then we have people, who think they're helping themselves by putting personal information in things, and then it's actually being
Yeah.
part of the new brain of this AI, so
Okay.
we don't want them doing that.
But I mean, it's critical that we're doing it here at this level with high school students and the teachers. It's going to be something that they'll be using and exposed to in their futures, and certainly even in careers. I've got friends. I mean, there are AI platforms, obviously, that, to your point, are just dedicated to certain industries too.
I have to brag a little bit too. Our tech coaches have really embraced this.
Yeah.
One of them has become a national trainer on AI.
Cool.
3 of them, including that one, have been asked to go to national conventions to present on AI. So,
Awesome.
Great.
and then we also had all of the English department chairs of the Chicago area come visit and sort of get a presentation on how we're doing things. So
That's really great.
We're pretty proud of our AI angle, so please make it a policy.
Okay, all right,
All
that
right,
sounds good.
thank you. Any other questions on that one? Okay, and I don't know if this process is the best to go through them all individually, if we just want to do questions, or?
No, this
Keep
works.
going?
Yeah,
We're
this
good?
is helpful. We,
Okay.
we have done this, it's long, but it
I know,
works really
I know.
well, you know.
Okay, 710, equal educational opportunities. And I think this is in response to the Title IX changes,
Yeah,
right?
it doesn't look like
You good on that one? 720, harassment of students prohibited, again related to the Title IX regulations, changes. And then I think I at least have a question on this one, but policy 760, residents. Anybody, you want to queue up any thoughts on that one before I?
Yeah, this is an
ask my
interesting
questions?
one. So we have, let's see if I can find this so I can read it exactly. But in our the board's current policy manual, there's a section in there that actually allows non-resident students to apply to attend at LT. And there's a process outlined. It talks about how the student will attend on a year-to-year basis. Approval for any 1 year is not authorization to attend the following year. The student will be accepted only if there's sufficient room, blah, blah, blah. It goes on down. I would like to recommend that we take this out of the board policy. I don't know that this has ever happened. It's been at least 30 years since we've ever accepted a student to pay tuition that doesn't live in our attendance boundaries. And the problem is this. I can never imagine allowing one student to pay tuition that's not a residence here, because if we allow one student, we will allow all of them. And we certainly not have the space to allow all students to attend if they were non-residents. So I could bring back a policy recommendation for June 16th, but this is just one that I've received an increasing amount of inquiries from families who don't live in LT's boundaries who want to attend here and want to pay tuition.
It would only be that one portion that you.
It would just be that one portion.
Okay, I just
Yeah,
wanted, okay,
yeah.
because I was.
Yeah, it
like-
would just be that one portion that says request for non-resident student admission.
Where does it say that?
It's at the bottom.
Request for
44.
student. Yeah, I'm actually, I think, I'm leaning towards that too, because I know I've heard that over the years from people thinking, and I think it also sets an expectation that just
Gives a false
isn't
hope.
delivered.
It
Yeah,
really
it's
gives a
like,
false hope because
if
I
I
see
write
the
this letter and
policy.
I say, that I do all these things, I think it's misleading.
Yep.
And so I would be in support of removing it. There aren't any other districts that really even do this as well that I can think of.
Jennifer, can you speak to that if there are other districts that?
I would tell you, especially in this area, right, in the Chicago suburban area where, right, you're all geographically like kind of on top of each other, it is not something that we see very common. We see it more in other parts of the state where, right, where some of it might be due to where one district is located compared to, if they are kind of in a more kind of separate part of the state and maybe the other areas are not as desirable around them. Some of the school districts also do this because they need to keep their own numbers up. But like I said, in this general area, you are not going to see it. And typically, exactly as Dr. Waterman said, is that once you've allowed or kind of opened the floodgates to one family, then you are getting into a place where you are going to almost have to have a almost admissions process, right, that you're going to have to develop. And the challenge that I have to talk a lot about on this issue is when you are then allowing it, you cannot discriminate on the basis of the student and their need. So you cannot say, if you have two students that are applying, one is kind of a typical gen ed student and another one is a special education student with significant needs and therefore then significant costs associated with that, you cannot say, I'm sorry, we can't serve your student, or we can't do that. That is going to open you up for a discrimination lawsuit on the basis of disability. And so that's where, and quite frankly, again, right, you within the boundaries of your district it is not that you are, you're close to capacity, you're oftentimes at capacity or over, right? There isn't a need that you need to be allowing students in. And I think exactly to the point, I think a lot of districts, this is one of those where press puts it in their sample policy and it kind of becomes that default language. But if it is not something that the board is ever going to be entertaining or you don't have any need to, then we also can take it out. It's solely optional. up to you. It might just be easier kind of to even foreclose all of those inquiries that are coming in on an increased basis. There may be times, that's what the next section directly below that addresses, is when there are kind of legal times when we may consider the admission of non-resident students. That's not the provision that we're considering, essentially just striking from your policy. Is the one where it is solely kind of optional to you about admitting non-resident students who would pay the full tuition amount.
I think too, if we ever came across a time frame where we had different needs and we needed to add it back
Yeah,
in, we
you
could
could
have a
get
board
it,
discussion
but
and
Yeah.
put it back in.
I'm very supportive of taking it out.
Yeah, I am
I worry
too.
about from how do we manage the population, to how do we manage discrimination, that why do we want to put ourselves at any risk?
And yeah.
So we can revise that for the June 16th meeting
would
and
be
bring it
great.
back with that recommended policy.
Thank you.
I think so.
Any other questions on that one? Next one, policy 770, attendance and truancy.
I think it kind of goes back to a lot of ESS.
Just another, just another recommendation to adopt the recommendation.
Okay. Policy 7180, prevention of and response to bullying, intimidation, and harassment. I think that one's going back to our Title IX.
That's very minor.
Policy 7185, teen dating violence prohibited. I did have a question on this one, but I need to go to my notes.
You're reading your copy.
No,
Just
I wrote it in there, did I?
Agent question mark.
Yeah.
That's
So,
what I just said.
thank you. That's what it was. Who is to be considered an agent, I think is what I was asking.
So it could be someone that the district contracts with,
Oh,
right? So not someone who's necessarily a direct employee and hire of the district, but ends up essentially working for the district as an agent on their behalf. This applies to, quite frankly, several of your policies. You see this language as it relates from a non-discrimination standpoint, that someone who is even acting on behalf of the district, I will tell you, it's kind of a debated and oftentimes litigated point. Could that extend as far as a volunteer, for example? I think it would depend on how far the umbrella goes and the person's role within the district, which is why we often talk about also who needs to have training on many of these particular laws. But typically, an agent falls within someone that is, you as the district have some sort of kind of control over the work or what they are doing on behalf of the district. And that often has to be analyzed on if you're getting a complaint as it relates to a non-direct district employee.
Okay. That makes sense, thank you.
So with like those language choices and those little changes, I mean, we talked about like, we never adopted the 2024 Title IX policies. And we stayed with 2020, but these changes they're still making them, like if it was 2020, I guess I'm just wondering, it's just words that they decided, press has asked us to make, but they don't really impact.
Yes, so what I would frame these as, press uses the phrase continuous improvement.
Okay.
And so a lot of times when, yes, there was that big shift for most districts or many districts, right, where they had to go from 2020 to 2024 Title IX and then back. So in kind of shifting back, press just as part of their regular review cycle is there a way that is better reflective of those 2020 regulations or kind of cleaning up the policy a little bit? So in your case, even though you never fully shifted to the 2024 regulations and changed your policies, what press is doing is just saying, hey, we still think and would like you to kind of update your policies to reflect those continuous updates. And we always recommend that because, quite frankly, just simply from a continuous update standpoint, then your policies will reflect the current press version, and it makes it easier, say, a year or two down the line, if there's actually a substantive update, your policy's already in the same place.
Great. Jill?
I do have one.
Go ahead, Joe.
Okay, so for 1D, when you're looking at that, when it says, the policy prohibits students from engaging in bullying, intimidation, and harassment at school, school-related events, and electronically. So would the electronically only be during those times, or would electronically be like one student's in one house, one student's in another house? Because to me, that's very far-reaching to be enforcing that outside of something that's related to school. Not that I'm condoning in any way any of those activities, but it's the school's
Nexus,
reach.
right? It's gonna be a nexus.
So it's a nexus piece, and the bullying law, so what that is referencing there is your bullying policy incorporates the specific definition of cyberbullying from state law, and now that I don't have it in front of you, I'm not gonna be able to directly quote it to you, but that is part of what it looks at, is what is the nexus between the school environment, and also made very clear when that cyberbullying definition was added to the bullying law, there was a big concern of, well, then what's the expectation for administration? We can't constantly be monitoring, right, what students
that's
are
the
doing
struggle.
online, especially even through their own devices. So it's also when it is then reported to school staff that we can then, right, respond to and determine how much of a nexus or how much of an impact there is. Because sometimes, like in that situation, the misconduct may occur off of school grounds. We ultimately can't necessarily investigate or respond to misconduct, but we can address what's happening within the school building, which might be not the initial misconduct, but might be some kind of resulting misconduct that may occur or continue on into this, within the kind of four walls of the building and impacting students.
And that's, I think, the struggle I've had, because even like years ago when we did the handbook and things like that, it was that nexus there.
Yes.
Where it just seems very broad.
Doesn't Senate Bill 100 require it to have a significant disruption on the educational environment as
Yes,
well, right?
so-
So they can be cyberbullying all they want outside of school, but once it comes in here and impacts what's happening.
I mean, it's just like, it's so vague that I don't love vague.
Well, it is, it's a gray area, and it is part of the challenge, right? Is because we really have to analyze it on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
What are the facts, what's the impact?
It's all different perspective now,
Yeah,
isn't
it
it?
is,
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a good question.
Thank you.
though.
And it's only getting more challenging, right? The
Yeah.
more
Right, that-
technology we add and layer on.
Well, I just feel like, I mean, because I think there's two different things. When you're looking from a monitoring standpoint, that's a different bar than to being able to look at, here's all the other things that have gone into it. Like the, electronic was 10% of it, this kind of thing. It happened at school, it happened in the hallway. All of those things, to me, I mean, I can see from the nexus there, but as long as we don't, there's nowhere in here that places the school on a burden for, like, to be checking on that or
Collecting
something
that
like
kind
that.
of evidence.
Right, and especially under the bullying law, like I said, if you looked at your full board policy 7180, it specifically talks about that there isn't an expectation, right?
Got it. That's-
your
okay.
staff is continuously monitoring.
I just want to make sure we're
Use of
protected in that
electronics.
regard. Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions on that one? All right, next is policy 7190, student discipline. I did have a question on that one. I did do a quick search on our old and proposed new student handbook, and the word sexting isn't referenced. Should it be?
So what I would, and part of that is a question, as I noted in there, so sexting specifically is something that press has received a lot of feedback from school districts on, right, about what is the definition of it, and a lot of districts had been coming up with their own definitions over time. Maybe they were calling it sexting, maybe they were kind of using some other sort of descriptor for it from electronic distributions of pictures and appropriate, those types of things. It has always been something from press's view and our view legally that you were able to discipline a student for misconduct related to sexting, right? If they were to distribute an electronic, image like that during the school day related to a school activity. Specific to your current handbook, once this board policy, or if it's adopted with this new definition, to the extent that, unless there's any changes you guys want to make to it, the plan, and Leslie will actually talk about this when we talk about the handbook section,
Right.
Our recommendation is then that this board policy, right, and therefore then any of these terms and definitions that are in it will then be included in your handbook. So as of right now, your handbook doesn't explicitly include that term. I would tell you that you always could discipline someone
Right.
under your existing policy if that misconduct occurred, but it will be included in your handbook once this policy is adopted, or if this policy is adopted with this term.
Okay.
That's a good question. Thank you.
Any other questions on that? Okay. Policy 7200, suspension procedures.
Yes, I think I did that question.
question.
Bless you.
Bless you. I think it was one of the ways it was worded. I mean, the support person sounds as though we're mostly,
Carrie, can you speak up?
sorry, like support person, we're mostly like talking about if they want to have like attorney representation or something.
So in terms of so this is again from that new ESS law.
Yeah.
This is specifically adding for those individuals a support person beyond just typically attorney representation, is that it could be someone who is attending with the student for, I mean, exactly what it
Okay.
kind of sounds like, for support.
Okay.
They are not there, in fact, to actually represent the student, to
Okay.
speak on their behalf, but maybe it is an outside counselor or
Sure.
someone that they are
Okay.
working with, that they would then have the right to also bring to hearing. And it was added to the policy because it's explicitly stated in the statute that the person has this right to bring them. Because oftentimes,
Sure.
we will sometimes put parameters or limit who someone might be
Yeah, I can
bringing
understand
to, to a proceeding like that.
And I think my question was more that it sounded like that was at the parents' discretion and not the students.
If they're under
So I
18.
guess I wonder how that works.
Well, I mean, ultimately, that is between the parent and the student.
Right.
And we all have to, our obligation is to offer the opportunity for them to attend, meaning that we can't prohibit that. But ultimately, that is a choice between the parent and their student. Now, you have some students who will turn 18 and different rights apply. I mean, I think that if we had a particularly challenging situation, right, we would try to work and navigate that with a family. But that choice is a family's choice, right? Our requirement is that we have to allow it.
Yeah, and I don't think I have a problem with that. I think I just was trying to make sure that there's a way that we protect like our students too as part of that. Just to, I don't know if there's a different way or we would want to word it differently.
Leave it to the student more so than just the parents or guardian?
Yeah, or, it's recommended that it's a, a decision that's, made between them, like a mutually agreed upon.
Although we have the authority though, right? Like this.
Are you looking at 6A?
And I guess it's not even about authority, right? It's about us just allowing that as an option, but, yeah, I think I was looking at A. Let's see, what does it say?
But I think it does. It says the student and his or her parents may appear
With a representative of their choice.
So, Carrie, Jill, that's exactly what I was going to point out. And I read that word "and" as not as limiting, right? Not as a only one gets to choose. I mean, and I don't want to speak on behalf of the administration, but if this were to come up, right, and our office was consulted about it, if the student was requesting to bring an outside support person, I don't think we would stand in the way of it. Like I said, if the parent for some reason was prohibiting it, we can't
Sure,
necessarily
okay.
prohibit it, but we wouldn't get in the way of a student wanting to bring that person, given the statutory language and also the way that the policy is.
Okay, and I think that maybe that is what it is
Yeah,
for me.
I
wanna
read that as the right
clarify.
rests with both of them.
I see.
Yeah, because I didn't, I mean, right, because like if it said and or, then it would be almost giving exclusive, maybe saying
You
the
don't have-
parent only has to decide and not the student, but in this case, and because I was thinking if like there was a parent that was like, this person has to come, the student was like, no, this is like my thing, I want to do, whatever. I
But
just
would
wanna
it make
sure.
sense, though, to limit the age, though, like to say a student under 18?
Under 18.
So, because then we would have a different situation that would arise if they were 18 or older.
Yeah, we don't talk about that in
Specify
here.
that in the policy about who's making that decision, but the law doesn't limit that. And,
So we
I
wouldn't-
guess the ESS law doesn't limit it in that way. They say
Okay.
that the student and the parent have the right to determine that.
But so like when you had said, like if the student was 18,
Right, they're an adult.
they may not even want their parent to come. Do they have to be required to bring their parent if their student's 18?
Well, technically, right, they are still within the household of their parent when they are a student and enrolled in the school district. And so we are still going to give notice to their parent if there is going to be a suspension, like in this case, a suspension from school.
Okay.
Now, again, that to me, I view as more of a family issue. That if the parent and the student are disagreeing about who is going to be attending, like if, for example, well, this is just simply about providing notice, and then if they want to request a review of that, that ultimately would come to the
Okay.
board. But ultimately, that is a family issue for them.
So it really doesn't matter that if the student's 18 or under 18?
Doesn't really matter.
doesn't
Okay.
sound like it. Okay.
That's, because you
Yeah,
said it would be a
that's
different set of rules, so I
Well,
was
I
like, we
mean,
need to
I meant
outline
it
that.
more as in terms of, like, what the student might be able to address, right, with their
Right.
parent, and what resources
Got
they
it.
access outside of school in terms of, you know, what support people that they might have.
So a little bit different than an IEP situation.
Correct.
Okay, got it. Okay.
Okay. Thank you for that.
Other questions, thoughts? Okay. Sorry, we were at suspension, right? So we
7210.
are on
Expulsion.
7210, expulsion procedures. Any questions on that one?
Similar to what we just
Yep,
reviewed.
yep. Policy 7250, student support services.
Nope.
And I did see that we are referencing this in our handbook now, so this would comply with the policy.
I mean, I do think that 4 could be, people could be upset about that. Like giving the superintendent, shall annually inform all school personnel and students 12 years of age and older in writing of the availability of counseling without parent or guardian consent.
So that's already code,
That's-
right?
I was gonna say, that has been
Right.
required
Yeah.
by law for.
Yeah. Right. Well, I'm just saying that we're putting that with that.
It is, and now it is required by the ESS law.
Perfect.
That we give annual notice, right, that the districts give annual notice to families of that.
Got
And
it.
it's referenced in handbook by the
Yep.
code number, I think, not necessarily spelled out.
Okay.
As long as,
Yeah,
not that it's
no,
a
you're
bad thing, I
right.
don't mean, but
You're
just point that out
Yep.
for an explanation.
I will just say from experience, even though you're right, it may upset some parents if they see it, it is often better in the situations that we've had come through our office and not specific to your district, where a parent is upset about a student maybe who's been accessing services. And it's usually far better when the district can point to, we've informed you, parent, that a student has a right by law to access these, services, rather than actually the parent feeling like that they weren't informed. Now, I'm not saying that every parent reads every page of your entire handbook, right? That almost becomes a challenging thing, given the size that it has to become because of many requirements to have everything in there. But I think it's one of those where it is better to give that notice or let families know that that is available, rather than, usually when sometimes the situation might be that the family didn't even know that the student had the right to access these services on their own.
Okay. Any other questions on that one? All right, so I think I'm going by the list here, but it may be a little out of order for you guys. Policy.
Sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Sorry.
You want to go back?
Yeah, just one minor question. I see that Aaron's law is referenced, but Elisa's law is not. Is that not something that is followed by the state?
So can you just give me a little bit more context?
Suicide prevention?
Yeah,
Isn't
that's
that-
Alyssa's mission.
So, Alyssa's mission.
Yeah.
So, there's a separate policy that addresses that. This policy only relates to student support services. You have a separate board policy that
Okay.
addresses that. It's just not one that has an update, so it's not before the board for review at this time.
Understand.
And there is a legal requirement for school districts to provide training for staff annually. Is it every year? It changed a couple years back. I think it's,
I believe it is.
Yeah, I was gonna say, Ed probably has a very good working knowledge of that.
good. The next one is policy 7255, students who are parents, expectant parents, or victims of domestic or sexual violence. This is a new policy. Done this one.
We're definitely ahead to the rewritten.
Sorry, I did, because I'm going in order of the,
No, I know, I did that to all of you, because I put it in numerical order rather than your press policy order, so I have 83 basically.
I don't have my book
press
with me.
policy numbers.
83 of 95.
there we go, thank you.
Wait, we're on page 83.
83.
It's like the first time before you said that.
I know.
It is page 111 in your board packet.
Thank you.
Okay. It's 2265. Is it in Hodges Louise's thing?
It's just, the recommendation is just adopt the new policy, so.
Yeah.
just rewritten.
It's a new
No, it's
one.
all, it's just the, all.
brand new.
it's all the
Just
Title
adopt-
It's all,
IX.
well, yeah.
Right,
Well,
right.
Yeah,
Okay.
recommendations are adopted.
Sorry, yes. Yep, okay.
But wouldn't we would have to modify it though, to adopt it, because we'd have to insert the name.
No,
So no, that's what she was talking about
No,
before,
we don't have
right? Like, we would adopt the policy as is, and then we would insert the.
Got it,
right.
okay.
So, yeah.
Got it.
So that
That's
stays
where I was
always
confused.
intact.
I know
The
the one that we
part-
were talking
the
about, 'cause the
partners
other one's
change.
had
We
a
don't
name.
have to, yeah, we don't have to
Then
do.
if it ever comes back to you for an
Yes.
update, it'll show you.
Yes.
Got
Because you
it.
have
So we
it.
can always change the names,
Yeah.
because, got it, okay.
Always
That was from the other one that I was confused about this, okay. I'm a little slow.
No, you're not.
Thanks.
I had
Right,
the
and
same
this is the
question.
new policy, right, that is required for you to have, press, put all the necessary components in it based on this new ESS law, and as you've seen over the entire, packet here.
Yeah.
I think it touched
Did,
20
everything.
some odd of these, policies, because there are just far-reaching implications and changes as a result of this law. Now, how much that's going to look like on a day-to-day basis in schools, I think we kind of have to see how that plays out. But from a policy standpoint, there were obviously significant changes, including in having this new standalone policy as it relates to the procedures that have to be in place.
Yeah, this one's a doozy.
Yep,
A lot to unpack.
a lot.
I feel like the way it's worded is a little bit confusing. Sort of felt like it almost could have been different policies. Different
Sorry,
It felt like it could have been different policies a little bit for different circumstances, because I know we already do have some policies in place to identify, or to address some of these situations.
This is the challenge, I think, that faces press, much like if you might remember last year, we had to adopt the new policy on the racism-free schools law. This is the, press has this large structure that you have. You already have a uniform grievance procedure that addresses a lot of complaints. And then the General Assembly will pass a new law that has very specific policy requirements. And there isn't always a good way to insert them into the existing structure, which is why you often end up then with a new standalone policy that then often references. So like, again, in this case, much like in the situation, in the case last year with that new policy that reflected new laws, you get a statement of what the law says has to be in policy, and then you're referencing, for example, the UGP if there is a complaint process. So like I said, it's not always kind of perfect or clean in that way, because press has to insert kind of and create something new, and then also amend the existing policies that relate to it.
It's just, it feels like a lot. I think what I was really questioning, kind of stood out to me is line item 3. Notifies all district employees and agents that upon learning or suspecting that a student is a parent, expected parent, or victim of domestic or sexual violence, they must refer the student to the resource person. Like, that, to me, is a lot on any person to be suspecting something or presuming something. I don't know. It's interesting language that I think was chosen. I don't know that it makes sense for us. Like, I don't know what the legal ramifications are, or what the, what those kinds of responsibilities are to our staff.
Well, so one, it reflects the statutory language, which admittedly is not always
Right.
written,
I know.
maybe as we would write it in hindsight. But also, I view this as very similar to how you provide training to all of your district employees on Title IX complaints, right? Or someone who reports of sexual harassment, or someone who may report of bullying, that your staff member who receives a report, and again, the individual reporting it does not always label it as such, right? So it might be information that they are sharing about themselves, or about information that they know about another student, for example. And your staff are trained to then go and report it to the designated person, right? So again, I'm going to use the example of Title IX and sexual harassment, right? If someone comes in and makes a report and says, so-and-so is making these comments to me or touched me in this way, and they reported it to a teacher that they felt comfortable reporting it to.
Right.
The expectation is then that teacher goes and reports it to, in the case of Title IX, your Title IX coordinator. So similarly here, the expectation is that if there is a report, right, that now, in the intention of this law, so I'll give the example of victims of domestic or sexual violence, is to ensure that these students, because they are kind of identified often as at-risk students, and that when we then learn that someone may fall into that category, be categorized as such a student, that staff member needs to be going and reporting it to one of those designated staff members that you have. And another parallel would be almost like for homeless students as well, right? We then have obligations to provide certain services and supports to these students. That does not then automatically flag them in a particular way, right? There are additional steps that resource person takes, and you guys will then utilize, right, your larger, broader support system that you have for those students. But it is that idea that if a staff member learns this from a student, we don't just disregard that information, right?
Yeah.
We are now obligated to essentially report and potentially then put that student in connection with supports that they can have in school so that they can, hopefully, complete high school and move on from that point.
And I think, Les, maybe you can speak to this. Our Alyssa's mission training speaks to this acknowledge, care, tell. They're learning, if they're hearing something of concern, they're going to find a trusted adult or somebody. And I imagine in practice, this is probably being done on any given day.
Yeah, I think I appreciate that what we're trying to do is give the students all the support that they need, because, right, they have a right to their education. We want to make sure that they succeed and that they're safe. Yeah. And so I do appreciate that comes from that place. I also want to look at the flip side of it. Is there ever a situation where we're making something, potentially making it, or inaccurately assuming something that could get us into trouble or not be a good idea or potentially put somebody in the way of harm? Further.
And I think that's the purpose of having the report then, if it's, for example, an individual teacher who receives that information, right, they may be unsure that they are then going to the designated resource person who has had training and who also is kind of tapped in as part of your larger support system, so that there are ways that we go about talking to the student, right, identifying, that information. You're right. Thinking exactly about those pieces of, has the student experienced this? Maybe the school is the first person that has learned this, and then how do we support them maybe through some broader steps?
Sure.
So that's part of the training also that goes into being that resource person, as well as the training that your broader support.
And I wanted to make sure too, that the staff would feel comfortable and, because that's a big responsibility too. So, and I guess to your point, I know they do that all the time because they care so much about our students, and they're always looking, and they are the first point of contact in so many ways that none of us even are aware of, that we don't get that close to our own kids sometimes. So I really appreciate that, but I want to make sure that, that there's the right process for them, and that they feel supported, and that they, that responsibility doesn't feel like it rests just like with them, only that they have the right support in the right places to do that. And then, does this policy change any of the types of resources that we provide to our students for each of these different situations? Does it require us to provide certain types of services? I mean, I don't know what that looks like.
So I guess the way I look at it from a legal policy lens is the changed requirements are those that you actually see reflected in the other policies. So for example, in terms of, and it's not necessarily a direct service, but there's changes in your attendance policy for these groups of identified students. There's changes in, we saw in the home hospital instruction policy that you have. So like I said, that's a broader legal policy change. Now, internally, in terms of your support systems, I would leave that to Leslie and others to be able to talk about. I don't know that the law requires that specifically. It's really that it's extending additional rights to these groups of students.
Great. Okay.
I would just say that fortunately or unfortunately, our staff that work in student services are very well versed in supporting students who have been in any and all of these categories.
Great.
So we have provided supports for expectant parents, victims of abuse, and so I don't see that as being anything that will be above or beyond what they are already very well trained to manage. And even in terms of the notification, or that all district employees have that responsibility, it's really similar to mandated reporters. All of our staff are mandated reporters and have to be ready at any point to pass along reports of any suspected abuse or harm to a student or child. So, you know, it's one of those unfortunate realities, but our staff is very well trained and understand that expectation.
It's part of policy 5100.
Okay.
All those training
Yeah.
are outlined in the staff
Right.
development program.
Yeah, and the only thing, not to prolong this conversation, but the only thing I'll add too is, what is unique about this law and the policy evolution, and I think it might even, to part of what Leslie was just talking about, is that your staff is already doing is, this is also something, I don't know if I've ever seen this done, is that when the General Assembly passed this law in 2021.
Right.
With a 2025 effective date. Right, so like, I think to some degree is think about all the things that have, the services to students that have kind of grown and developed even in those 4 years. So in some ways, it's like, okay, well, to be honest, I've never seen such a long stretch, right? Kind of a long runway
Yeah.
from an implementation date. Now, obviously, it touches on a lot of things, so it's been giving schools opportunities to be ready to implement it. But I think exactly to that point is your teams are already putting in place these services and support, so it doesn't actually end up to being a lot of
I appreciate
practical
that.
changes.
Thank you, yes, thanks Dr. Owens, too.
I only had one quick comment. The policy, the name of the policy itself, it would be great if it actually included the words support services at the end. Because right now it feels like there's not enough of a descriptor. And I know we probably can't change it, I get it,
Yeah,
but
no.
I'm just saying.
You can, certainly, you can ask that of press. I mean, our recommendation is usually just to follow the titling that they
Sure.
give, you know, essentially just for ease and consistency of it.
Yeah, it just seems like it's missing the intent behind it. It's to support them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Thanks.
Anything else
Thank
on
you
that one?
guys, thanks
Yeah,
for
no,
putting
that's
up with
good.
that. I just had to kind of really
Yeah,
go through
it's a
that.
big one.
Very,
It's new.
very much, sorry,
Lot
into
to it.
great depth, so I appreciate that.
So I'm gonna get you back up to the other order. We're on page 76 of your packet. Sorry about that. So we're on 7270, administering medicines to students. Sorry, 94.
I'll follow the
Board
right order
book, it
next
was
time.
76. PDF, it's.
No, it's fine.
I think you had a question on that, Tim.
This is administering medicines,
Okay,
right?
good.
You did, hold on, I'll pass it back to you. You want it. So, hold on. It starts here, I think. There you are. Thank you. Of course.
Oh, so the,
This was your
there's
question
something.
about Narcan, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
There was something in here about the press policy that we did not want to include. Was it about the epinephrine injector and storage of any medication by school personnel?
No, I think
Was-
the recommendation was to adopt.
I thought, Jennifer, you made recommendation to remove that.
So in my memo to the board, I made additional recommendations to that self-administration of medication section that talks about self-carry and self-possession of medications. Is that, Tim, is that what you're asking
That is what
about?
yeah. So the district, is it the district shall incur no liability except for willful and wanton conduct as a result of any injury arising from a student's administration of medication?
Yes. So that paragraph is reflective of the current school code language.
Okay.
As revised in that kind of red line strikeout that I
Oh,
put in there.
including asthma medication or epinephrine injections or medication required under a qualifying plan.
Because those are medications that a student, if approved by a qualifying plan, their doctor and their parent and your school team working together, students do have the right to self-carry or self-administer or sometimes both, those medications. And so we want to include them in that kind of no liability statement as well.
So that, in your memo, excuse me, Jennifer, you have the recommended additional policy language to include. Yep.
Yeah. So it's not reflected in the board book, but it's in here.
Right.
It's right, it's in the memo.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
is the thought to include that in there?
Include that as well. Yeah, that's recommendation.
Okay.
And then we would add that to the policy.
I think it's helpful.
Thank you. Any other questions on this one? Okay, we're getting close. Policy 7310, restrictions on publications, high schools. Any questions on that one?
315,
Did I skip one?
315, yeah.
310.
7315,
Yeah,
sorry,
but
did I say
he meant
310? 7315. Okay.
Yep.
Policy 7340, student records. I believe that is our last one.
Good work.
All right.
Great.
Anything else for the good of the cause on press 118? It's a lot.
So I have, just to recap here, we're gonna update 760 to remove the non-resident student request information from that residency policy. We're gonna update our, I can't think of the number, I think it's 235, which is that access to electronic networks, which is the AI policy. We're gonna update that. And we're going to reflect Jennifer's recommendation for 7270. Those are the three. Everything else will be recommended as outlined in the memo,
Yep.
or as recommended by press. Okay, got it.
Sounds good.
Well, thank you for all of your work.
Thank you so much.
Administrative team, and Jennifer, we really appreciate all the time and energy that went into this.
I'm gonna make a recommendation to the board that we modify we're not taking action on anything tonight, so I'd like to modify the agenda and move all the way to the end and talk about our softball project, because we have two people in the audience that are waiting around for that, and it could be a long time if we get into the handbook discussion, so if you guys don't mind, again, we're not taking action on this.
So legally, we are able to do so, right? Have our lawyer.
Information items only.
Very good.
So I'll just jump right
Please.
in. So
Wonderful.
this is some new information for some of our new board members, but in February of 2024, the board at the time provided authorization for the development of bid specifications and approval of a $2 million donation agreement to design and construct a new girls varsity softball field at South Campus. This was done because of the amazing generosity of the Baker family, who is represented here tonight by Michael Baker, and the Stacy Ann Baker Charitable Fund. Throughout the last year, planning has continued on the design process, and our team has worked with the Village of Western Springs to receive all the zoning permit approvals on the project, which we just got about a month ago, which is super exciting. So on Thursday, May 22nd, bids were opened with the base project coming back at a total cost of about $2 million. It's all outlined in the memo that I sent to you guys last week. One of the things we did was, because of that original $2 million donation, we built the base bid package, or base project package, around that $2 million price tag. But then we also added some alternates for other items that could be included if the base project came back cheaper. And so those alternates included like a upgraded press box, a better bleacher system, sound system, better scoreboard, a lot of just upgrades to the facility. And so let me go back to where I'm at here. In addition to that original $2 million donation, so once we got that information back, I actually met with Michael Baker last week. In addition to that original $2 million donation, the family has expressed some interest in donating an additional $1 million, so that not only the base project, but the entire project could be completed, which is, we're just blown away again by the generosity.
I feel like that needs a round of
So him and I met last week. We are in the process of working on an amended donation agreement, as well as bringing back the bid specifications and the actual contract for the work at the June 16th meeting. And so obviously, again, Michael, thank you so much for everything, including this additional donation. We have no doubt this is going to be an amazing complex for our girls softball field, and I can't thank you enough. And then in addition to that, we have John Morawski here, who's the architect involved in the design planning. He can speak a little bit about the, just about kind of where we're at with the project and go from there.
Sure. Just a quick update. I don't know if I need to be here. Sounds
official now. So bid opening went really well. The lowest qualified bidder was Henry Brothers Construction Company, who has worked in the district several times. They actually did the Reaver Center remodeling, so we were very comfortable with them. We are going through several co-ops for, as Dr. Waterman stated, updated grandstand, full bleacher, roof dugouts, video board, as well as a scoreboard, AV system, Musco lighting, full turf, infield and outfield. So it's going to be a Class A facility. We're super excited with that. That contract will be hopefully awarded after the next board meeting, whenever that gets approved. The schedule would be for all of the turf, gravel haul off, or gravel importing, dirt haul off, all done by the end of the summer, with the construction to finalize in the fall. So we have a little hang up with MWRD because of a long story, but we are getting through that. So we're super excited to keep the project moving.
So our goal is, again, in next week's board packet, you'll have an amended donation agreement as well as the contract information and all the information we need for the board to consider both of those at the June 16th regular action meeting. So again, tonight was just an informational meeting to kind of give everyone an update on where we're at with that project.
It's great news. Thank you.
Very exciting.
All right.
I would just say I just can't wait for the first game. It's going to be amazing.
It's going to be great.
Hopefully we get some good weather, because
Right?
I am really looking forward to this, and thank you for the generous donation.
And
Yeah,
sorry,
no,
go ahead.
please.
No, I was going to say, and I also mentioned this in the board materials, but the facility will be named Baker Field after Stacy. So that was part of the original donation
That's
agreement
awesome.
back in a year ago.
Thank you.
All right. I appreciate the board allowing us to move the agenda around, just because I know
Yeah.
that they've been sitting there for a while. So
Yeah.
Totally.
that, good to go.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay. So now we will move on to our next item related to student services and begin with a Parent-Teacher Advisory Behavior Interventions Committee meeting, PTABIC update. Dr. Owens.
Thank you, President Albors. First, I want to apologize. I found a typo in this memo at the end. There's a few extra bullet points in the list of things that we're going to change for next year. The bottom 4 were a holdover from some recommendations to our code of conduct from last year, so I apologize for that, and I will remove that for the packet next time. But just disregard those. Those were considered and added in or not added into last year's code of conduct update. So, because that was our topic for the PTA-BIC. But we concluded our year-long work in May with the PTA-BIC. We had a great committee, and I know that I gave updates after each meeting, but just to recap, we have representation from administrators and staff, as well as parents and guardians and community members. And this year, because our topic was attendance, we had a really natural fit of a community member who also is the West 40 Director of Truancy Outreach, Nancy DeBray. So she was on our committee, which was really helpful to have that community connection at the table with us. But, you know, overall, we looked at a ton of data and discussed all different parts of student attendance. So the reasons for attendance, trends, academic impact, all of the ways here at LT that we support good attendance, and the ways that we intervene when attendance becomes problematic. And as it states in the memo, we have not been immune to the nationwide trends in increased chronic absenteeism. Those trends started prior to the pandemic and then were really exacerbated. And we learned a lot and discussed, you know, that attendance, I think if there's one thing that came out of this, that it is such a complicated issue. And it's a complicated social issue that really, you look into it and there's intersections of all types of social issues. Mental health concerns, particularly anxiety and depression for our students, we know that that's increased among adolescents. Increased need for relevancy and engagement of academic learning based on post-secondary options in the changing post-secondary world. Social factors, increased caretaking responsibilities that our students have, safety factors, specifically within our historically marginalized populations, and shifts in kind of a remote work from home culture, both inside and outside of school. So all of that combines to create a really complicated issue that if we could solve with one thing, we would have done that. But I think the committee got a really good sense of all the different ways in which we support attendance or try to intervene. And Dr. Tyrell and Adam Davis, who's one of our APs, gave a lot of information from the attendance office and AP office. Drew Eater and our social workers and counselors that were sitting on the team gave a ton of information about all the things that are happening within student services and within those weekly SST meetings that we do to try to support student attendance. So we certainly wish that, given all of the resources that we put into attendance, that our chronic absenteeism number would be more significantly shifting and improving, but we are, where we are, and we're going to keep working on it. And what we decided as a committee is that we want to be really specific, and I guess specific is the word, on what levers to pull regarding attendance. So when we try doing a lot of different things, we are spending a lot of resources trying to adjust attendance and maybe not really truly understanding what is making changes and what's not. And so we talked about a few brief changes that are outlined, or a few changes that we'll make for next year that came from the committee, and they're outlined in bullet form in this memo. But a couple things just to draw your attention to. The parents and guardians on the committee felt strongly that having an easier way to report attendance would be helpful to them, and we have a way of doing that through Infinite Campus that also draws parents' attention to when their student has been absent and how many times, so it gives them that information. We talked about just communication about attendance and a lot of conversation at the table about there's a lot of confusion about what chronic absenteeism means, what it is, what it isn't, what counts, and so just really, a few staff members within our building, but all of our staff members and all of our community members and parents. So that's what we'll be working on, and hope that helps move the needle. The other change that we will be looking at is, with the code of conduct discussion from last year's PTA-BIC, we changed the wording so that it included a requirement that students had to attend 4 periods of school a day in order to participate in extracurriculars. And we felt like that was a good spot to start in terms of encouraging students. We want students to participate in activities. We don't want to make it hard for students to participate in activities. We understand there are extenuating circumstances, but we also feel like those extracurriculars and athletics are the privilege that comes along with coming here and doing well in school. So we had it at 4. Dr. Tyrell and the APs really looked into the data on attendance, and we were noticing some pretty interesting trends in terms of 5th period attendance absences, and noticing a pattern. And so the recommendation came forward that we would like to hold students to attending 6 periods of class per day in order to participate in those academic or extracurricular activities after school. And so certainly we know there are extenuating circumstances. We will deal with those on an individual basis. But again, to really hit home that first and foremost, being here at school and fulfilling those obligations as a student, and then you can participate in those activities. And we think that we won't see a decline in participation, but we're hoping we'll see an increase in attendance based on that. So those were the substantive changes for next year that came out of our committee, but also Tim Labor sat on the committee. Jill Gretsch was on the committee as well. So I don't know, Tim, if there's anything else you wanted to add, or Dr. Tyrell, Dr. Rowe was on the committee. Again, I think we had a lot of really good conversations and some eye-opening conversations, because I think attendance seems like a simple issue until you start digging into it and you realize it's anything but simple.
I think the only thing I would add is similar to our LTCAC, getting that parent input and perspective, I think was really helpful in us coming up with some really good ideas. I think the work that was done on that committee this year is, if we look at it just by the impact of what we're looking at tonight with stipends, the ways that we're trying to get kids involved, which has always been on our strategic plan to get them connected to our school, handbook changes that we're doing, a lot of that was born from this committee, and again, from the voices of our parents and community members. So I extraordinarily appreciated being on the committee, and I really appreciated the voices that we heard from our parents. So.
Absolutely. So any other questions? This is just an informational item, but any questions from the other board members? Happy to take those. But again, we talked about next year. Our topic, there are some specific topics within school code that the PTA-BIC is sort of in charge of looking at, but one of the focus items for next year will be restorative practices and restorative interventions. After going through a full year now of having our restorative intervention room, we feel like that would be a really good committee to look at the data coming from that intervention, and having that same opportunity for community members, parents, and staff members to dig into how that's all working and what impact it's having on our students.
I really love how this committee is shaping, you know, those practices that we're putting into place and making a real difference. I really appreciate the time everyone's putting into it, because I know it's another committee and we have a lot. You guys always have a lot on your plates already, so thank you for doing that, and for the parents and any other staff members that have been involved and the community members working on it.
Marilyn helps entice people coming with lots of
Oh, she's
breakfast
good.
treats and coffee ready
She
for
is
us.
good
We
at
appreciate
that.
her efforts at 7 a.m. in the morning. It's an early committee, so, you know, a little extra.
I appreciate that too.
A little extra. Yeah, it's a great committee. So we'll be looking for other members for next year and reaching out, specifically people who have been involved within our school community regarding restorative interventions, but then also having that parent voice and guardian. So we're excited to keep the work going.
Love it.
Very good. All right. Looking forward to it. Our next item is our human resources. I'm sorry.
The whole handbook thing.
Oh, handbook.
Yeah.
Did I skip one?
Yeah.
That's
So now
a
we
big-
now
that's
we need
another
to
big
talk
I'm
about that
sorry.
next year's
This
handbook.
is a big meeting, my friend.
I
There's
know.
a lot to talk about here.
I know.
Yes.
All right. Next
Okay.
item is our first reading of 25-26 student handbook recommendations. Dr. Vaughn, sorry about that.
Thank you, President Alborz. So I put in the memo, I put some history on sort of how I came to be, I'll call it in charge of the student handbook. When I stepped into this role, our handbook was, you know, I'll call it piecemeal, but there was a lot of different parts and pieces that were put together from different individuals, and it wasn't really owned in any particular office. And so that was something that I took on, and it was pretty evident that it needed major revision at the time, just from all standpoints, from the usability of it, how the language that was used, all of the things. So we created a committee that year, and it was, again, a multidisciplinary committee, included families as well, but really looked into what are some of the changes that need to be made. We realized major changes need to be made. We did an overhaul to get it into a format that was more modern and up-to-date, easy to follow, and again, we wanted this to be a guide for families and students and our staff so that it would be much more user-friendly. So we did that work that year. We brought it, our cadence has always been, and then we bring it to the board in June for review and approval. So we did that. Last year, we decided, because of our work with the PTA-BIC on the Code of Conduct, that we were going to take that section and really update that and bring that to the board for approval. And it has always been our idea that we would try to get on a rotation that every 3 years we would have a comprehensive legal review. So Jennifer Rosenberg from Hodges was able to provide that, and she worked diligently to update so many things in this handbook. It was kind of a interesting timing because of the Press 118 update, so there's a lot of things, as you'll see in the chart that I included, that are kind of waiting for approval, and they will be changed out when if approval is provided to those policies. But there was just a lot that we needed to update to make sure that we were in line with all policy updates, legal updates, and just how we are operating things within the school. So I don't have, the handbook that's in your packet tonight is certainly reflects the changes that you see in the chart and the memo of all the changes that have been made, but there's a lot of changes that still need to be made. So it's not the most final handbook you've ever seen in June, but there's a lot of work that we'll do between now and when it goes live. Our handbook goes live typically August 1st so that it's ready for students in the next year. Our old handbook is in place until then. So we're not without a handbook right now, but we just want to make sure that we get everything up to date and some of the formatting pieces too. Jennifer gave a lot of really good advice in terms of shying away from using our interpretation of policies and our own editorials on policies and shifting into just using that full policy within the handbook. And so because of that, we were able to collapse some sections, put them together, rely on the policy, and again, if those policies are approved at the next regular action meeting, then we'll just swap those out as well. But it really just helps it to be very clean and clear, and then it helps us to not have those editorialized versions that might not absolutely align with the new policy update. So that's kind of the, I'd say, overall theme, and Jennifer can speak to that as well. But the way I put the chart together in the memo is really just each section now, what were completed changes, any routine changes. I didn't draw specific attention to every single change of a word or comma or things like that, but all those happen continuously. but put the substantive changes in, and then any of the changes that will be made either pending board approval of policy, or there are a couple things that still require some conversation for us as an administrative team, such as our directory information, student records information, that we just simply weren't able to do before this meeting. So that will be work that occurs this summer. So I know that's a ton of information, and it's so much to read through. Happy to answer any questions, and I'll look to Jennifer to see if there's anything you think I missed in our conversations or documentation.
I think all of it. I mean, the only thing I'll quickly add is there is so many increasing requirements on particular state laws that are saying you must include the policy in your handbook, which is just simply why handbooks now have grown to be right 100 pages. And I understand that kind of makes them less user-friendly, unfortunately. And so that's part of the reason why Leslie and I talked about how can we push forward some of that from even an organizational standpoint, that relevant information, what is practical for individuals that are going to use this, and then consolidating some of the areas where they might fall within a board policy, they're captured, and that ends up being kind of cleaner. But some of that can then be put to the end, where then it's there and it's available for individuals that are going to that information. It doesn't have to kind of clog the front of your handbook where we want that in particular to be more user-friendly, if you will. And then the last thing I'll note is, much like Leslie said, is in some ways this timing worked out just because so many of the policies you're looking at in this current press update have to be updated in your handbook. But that is also somewhat the reality every single year. It is a living, breathing document, so even the one that you kind of approve and give your blessing to each year, like I know will be asked, at your next board meeting, is something obviously that your administrative team is constantly kind of updating as needed. And obviously, then your families can be notified of any updates, when they happen. And I think that's actually a good thing that yours doesn't officially go live kind of until August 1st, because then you have time over the summer to finalize all of that.
Yeah. That's ideal time for our administrative teams to be able to think through, some of the changes in practice that we want to put in. And then just also, we have had the handbook online as a PDF, but we are going to switch that out to a Google Doc, because then it can be translated within the website with the, any language that you choose. So again, just trying to make it much more accessible for our families. And
Dr. Owens, can I, when you say that, it made me realize, I was not able to access any Google Docs on my work computer because of security issues. So making that more accessible might actually, in some cases, make it less accessible, just
Gotcha.
FYI.
Okay. We'll have to test that and look. I know I talked to our Mary Lynn, Director of Communications, to see if that was something that was feasible from the website standpoint. And I know I've talked to some other counterparts in other districts, and that's what they've done because it's such a lengthy document and because it changes. They've used those Google Docs and the related translation features, but I'll double check that for sure to make sure it would make it usable. I mean, if it's if it can't be accessed, that's not going to help anybody. So again, we're just trying to keep up with the changes.
Any Google Doc that I had from anything.
Okay. It's not like a permissions thing where it says you have to ask permission.
No,
They
it was
won't
just
let
my
you do it.
company would not allow.
Okay.
And what we might be able to do in those cases, we can, and we get some guidance when we have had our audits for multilingual learners too, but we might be able to then keep copies of some printed in different languages, or have some message that give them a resource to contact us if they need to receive it in a different language and in a different format. So thank you for that note.
Put a PDF and still maybe you can download it as a PDF.
Yeah, you just can translate the PDF.
Yeah. I think you can download like a live, whatever version of the PDF. If it doesn't let you go to Google Docs, it could still feed it with the most current information. There maybe is a way to do that on the website, probably, yeah. Okay.
And then the only other question I had was, at some point, once this is ready, parents and students sign off that they've read it and acknowledged it, right? That's still going to be happening.
Doesn't mean they've read it, no.
Yeah.
It's not like you have to initial every page, right?
Don't ask me if I've read every page of my daughter's handbook.
This one you
I will
don't.
not be able to lie. Yes, we do have we go through it, and our APs do a nice job of walking our students through it as well at the beginning of the year. Code of conduct is kind of handled even separately and with more emphasis for students who are participating. So there's lots of different ways that students are given the information that they know they need to be responsible for in terms of their behavior at school. So.
Okay.
So I'll keep making changes and I'll bring those back and make everyone aware. The bottom of each page of the handbook talks about that we make changes throughout the year. If anything is substantive or would change practice, we would certainly let people know. If it's simple little changes, those are usually things that just kind of happen on the fly.
Yeah.
But we try to keep, like I said, we try to keep it as updated as possible and then bring it to the board every June so that you have an idea of what's in there.
So we will bring this back on June 16th.
Perfect, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Now, we are going to move to human resources item for the first reading of the stipend committee recommendations. Piotrowski.
Thank you, President Alboris. Over the course of second semester, our stipend committee met 3 times to review stipend proposals for student activities as well as athletics. Our work focused on ensuring that the district's stipend structure continues to reflect student interest, program growth, safety considerations, and equitable support across all offerings. As a result of those meetings, we are bringing forward recommendations for both activities and athletics tonight. For student activities, we are recommending the creation of stipends for 4 clubs, those being Bailando con Todos, which is a Latin American dance group that celebrates cultural heritage through traditional and modern performances at school and community events. Careers in Psychology, which connects students to professionals and workshops in mental health and psychology-related fields, providing exposure to career pathways that many students are eager to explore. And Serbian and Irish Club, both of which are cultural organizations that support students in learning about, celebrating, and sharing aspects of Serbian and Irish heritage, respectively. These clubs are in line with other established cultural clubs at LT and have been active in school-wide and multicultural events. Each of these clubs is recommended for 1 stipend at the 2.64% base activity rate. The total cost for these activities is approximately $6,200. Happy to answer any questions that the board might have about the recommendations for student activities, if there are any.
I have one, and it's, I think, simple. Can you just explain to me what 2.64, the base activity, means?
Absolutely. Within our negotiated agreement, there is a formula that determines for every 14.4 hours of student contact for a club or activity, it equates to a 1% stipend on the rate. So a club that meets periodically, for instance, once every other week, would be that 2.64% stipend based on the number of hours that they would have with student contact.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Absolutely.
Other questions?
Thank you. Then moving on to the athletics side, we are recommending several new stipends to support growing programs, enhance player safety, and ensure consistency in coaching coverage. We are recommending 2 lower-level coaching stipends for football, where our freshman program now fields 3 squads, and we have increased interest in participating. These additions will allow coaches to specialize and better supervise players at the freshman level. We also are recommending 2 additional stipends for flag football, which you may recall we just approved the initial stipends for this year. There's been tremendous growth in that program. We are expanding to a 3-team structure for next year, freshman, JV, and varsity, and student interest continues to grow. That also creates the necessity to create a stipend for the spring flag football intramural program, which in its pilot phase drew over 60 participants this past spring and provides opportunities for students who are not currently involved in spring sports to participate in something new. Finally, we are recommending the addition of 1 assistant coach for each volleyball and lacrosse at the boys and girls level, so a total of 4 assistant coaches. These additions will ensure equitable support and adequate coverage for each level within each program, aligning them with the other large team sports that we have here at Lyons Township High School and enhancing player development and program management. The total cost for all of the athletic proposals is approximately $65,300. Happy to answer any questions that the board might have about the athletics proposals.
I have a quick question. The flag football items 2 and 3, yes. I'm not familiar. Is it a co-ed program? Is it girls only?
It is girls only.
Okay.
And so that is a program that began in earnest. Last year was the
Last
first
fall was
year.
the
Yeah.
first, I
So,
should say.
and we've had tremendous success and growth of the program. So when John Grunke and I originally talked about staffing it, we had one staffing model in mind, and we ended up needing to expand it almost instantly because we had, I think it was something like 72 students to try out for it initially. That's now grown to 3 programs. And so we are excited about that because we want to continue to provide opportunities, but with that comes the need to provide coaches as well.
Sure, yeah, thank you.
Absolutely.
Any other questions? Again, I think we talked about this in PTABIC, we talk about it in our strategic plan, we talk about how can we get our students to find a voice and a place for them in our school community, and all of these things do that. So I'm excited to see how these continue to grow, so. Thank you for bringing it forward.
This will come back on the 16th.
So we'll also come back on
Consideration of
16th, yep, very good.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. And then our next, and I believe last, right?
Last one,
Topic is our strategic plan, so I will turn that over to Dr. Waterman.
Thank you. So yeah, this is another example of something new. This is this collective board's first experience with discussing and reviewing our team's work with our strategic plan. Just as a little background, in June of 2022, the District 204 board at the time adopted a long-term comprehensive strategic plan. It was developed with engagement from our entire school community, and we really looked at past performance, core values, and anticipated future needs of the districts. If you kind of put yourself in the mindset of it, was that spring of 2022, so 3 years ago now. The plan ultimately includes 5 goals centered on student growth and achievement, learning environment and supports, high-quality, diverse staff, family and community partnerships, and then resource effectiveness and efficiencies. Every year, the Board of Education plays a really important oversight role in making sure that our plan continues to include goals and strategies and priorities that really honor the desires and the needs of our school community. And during the year, our leadership team will then facilitate a discussion on each of the 5 goals within the plan. We typically follow the schedule where we'll talk about Goal 3 in October, Goal 1 in November, Goal 4 in December, Goal 2 in January, and Goal 5 in February. It just seems to fit with the timing of the year for that specific goal and kind of what we're talking about. And that's really gives the board a chance to dive pretty deep into that goal. And so we'll typically spend at least an hour or more talking about, for example, in November, Goal 1, go through all the academic assessment data, everything related to student achievement. We obviously will talk about the aligned strategies as well, highlight areas of progress, acknowledge those areas where we still have improvements to make, and then also progress monitor along with that. The other really important part of our strategic planning process is something we call our action teams. So the action teams really make sure that we're prioritizing the right things and working on the right things. And so every one of our 5 goals has an action team made up of about 20 to 25 staff members at LT. They meet regularly throughout the school year. They provide additional oversight, but they also work to validate or challenge the information within that specific goal. They're the teams that help set our targets, our quantitative targets each year, and monitor progress. They give us a lot of really good feedback around priorities and really generate those insights into what's working and what's not working. So interestingly, when we start looking ahead to the next school year, the process begins now in the spring. So we don't get back in August and just say, okay, it's August of 2025, what should we work on this year, right? We want to start that process earlier in the spring. And so our action teams actually meet in May. The first thing they do is they look at all of our priorities from this year, and they look at, okay, what did we accomplish? And maybe more importantly, what did we miss or what did we not accomplish yet? Because that becomes our starting point for the following year. Following that work, which that really happened during the weeks of May 5th and May 12th this year. That's when all of our action teams met and started developing those. Now it's the board's turn and the district administrative team's turn to kind of look at those draft lists and give us feedback. So that happens throughout this month of June. So then the hopes we can refine, revise based upon feedback from a lot of different groups. We will then bring that back to the June 16th board meeting, ask you guys to approve it, and then we are ready to go kind of understanding what our priorities are for the next school year. So what we do then is, we'll take tonight's feedback and bring that back. And so I always say, all the time with our strategic plan, there's no secrets. All the information related to this is on our website. We have a strategic plan website that has our strategies, our priority lists, all the community feedback that was collected along the way in June of 2022, scorecard metrics, video content, all of that. And so The last thing I will say before opening this up for thoughts and feedback is this. You'll notice that the purpose of our priority list is exactly that. It's priorities. It's not, you may see some granular micro-level tasks on there from time to time, but the overall goal is not to list every single thing that we're going to do next school year. It's really just to capture the broader macro-level work and macro-level priorities that we really want to focus on for next year. So with that, again, in your packet, you have the slide deck that has the goal, and then following that, the priorities outlined by strategy. So that's what we see as a leadership team and an action team and a staff. That's what we see as the most important work we're going to do next year.
So I guess the question, well, comment first and then question is related to strategy 1, guaranteed viable, rigorous curriculum. I guess the first thing I wanted to say is Scott, I appreciated all the effort that you've done on this goal over at least my 2 years on the board. I think I've seen a tremendous, wonderful trajectory of I don't even want to say realigning, but ensuring that we have rigorous curriculum that meets the needs of our students. The question to that is, how will that transition now with Dr. Payne's work? Obviously she's not starting until July 1, but has there already been some conversations about that?
Yeah, she's been transitioning since February, so spending time with our team in meetings. She's at our workshops in June, so she's going to pick up the baton from what Scott has done and move it forward.
Got links to thousands of
that you're happily turning over, I imagine, right?
Yep, it's a great question, though.
Very good, thank you.
Just at the workshops, it's been wonderful seeing the staff talk about all the work that Scott has done with our curriculum review and them really taking ownership of that. So that's been, we saw some of that today.
Awesome.
And that was a big thing, right? Within Goal 1 was kicking off a curriculum review process 3 years ago. So that was something that had not been done here. And,
I wish we could have done it faster, but it takes time.
It does.
Yeah.
It does. Right. You don't want to rush it, right?
Yeah. But because of it being my last year, we did way more than we normally would have this year. We did all the electives and the core.
Okay.
And then, so there's just some core left for next year.
That's awesome.
Other questions, comments?
I would say too, like if you think of something tomorrow or next week, like email us and say, "Oh my gosh, I didn't see this in there." Like that's the goal here, is to get these lists refined to the point where we're feeling pretty good about going into August. So don't think, if you don't think about it tonight, you can't reach out before.
No, these are always really comprehensive, really, really well thought out to-dos, so to speak, you know?
Yep.
I mean, it doesn't
So,
seem very
appreciate it.
global to me because there's a ton of initiatives that you guys are looking to do in a year.
Yeah.
Yep.
There's a lot in there.
It's great.
Okay. Well, thank you, and we'll look forward to this at
June
our
16th, yeah.
June 16th meeting. Very good. Okay. That brings us to public participation. Marilyn, do we have anyone signed up? Let's see, that is no. Very good. As follow-up to tonight's earlier discussion on the Willow Springs property, the board will now be entering closed session under the following exception: the setting of a price for sale or lease of property owned by the public body, 5 ILCS 120/2C5. The board will not be taking action after closed session. Can we have a motion to move into closed session?
So moved.
Second?
Marilyn, will you please call the roll?
Member Vita Daniels.
Yes.
Member Kazelka Campbell.
Yes.
Member Dillon.
Yes.
Member Giannotti Frye.
Yes.
Member Kennedy.
Yes.
Member Lopez.
Yes.
Member Alvarez.
Yes. Motion passes. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Take a quick break.
Yeah.
Quick break.